Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, wherever you may be in the world today. Hey, this is Tom, your host for today's remote session. Today, we're talking AI email attacks versus AI email security. This one's sponsored by the folks over at Sublime Security. I got excited about this one because you guys know I'm older. I was a huge Sublime band follower. So I got excited and I was like, I dusted off the old concert shirt. I grabbed it and I had to throw it on for today's thing. I'm usually all buttoned up, as you guys know, but I was like, I got to do it. I got to do it. But no, welcome everybody. I want to say thank you all for joining us. We've got a great session here today. Very relevant. I mean, this is the stuff that's happening continuously. Doesn't seem to matter what technology is happening. Email security or email attacks are really what's happening to the bad guys are really able to leverage this stuff. So we're going to get into this. We're going to see what's happening, give you guys some good information to share within your org and get a better grip on these things, right? So I just want to say thank you again to the folks over at Sublime for making today's remote session possible. Again, just having fun with making the slides and some AI today. We've got our group of folks there. They're supposed to be your audience members, right? And they're stock kind of doing the hard work that you guys are out there doing. And of course, I slapped the cool logo in there too. So thank you over at Sublime for making this possible. I'm gonna be honest. I'm probably gonna toss out a few song lyrics here and there just to have some fun with today. But please follow along, take some notes. If you have questions, we've got our crew of folks here live. We want to hear from you. I've got a ton of questions for them, but I'd rather hear from you in the audience because I want to help you guys and gals get your jobs done and dialed in better, right? So please don't be shy. Give us some questions. Whatever your burning question of the day, throw it in there. Let's hear from you. That being said, real quickly, housekeeping. Today's slides, they're nothing to write home about. It's basically the slides I created. But if you need something for proof with your certifying body, I know some of them want a PDF of the slides. Grab that. It's in there. Again, we're taking questions. Certificate of attendance after about 40, 45 minutes. You can download that nice little PDF if you want something in addition to those slides. There's also a great new follow-up webcast to this from the folks over at Sublime that's loaded in those resource documents in there as well. So take a look at those. If AI is your pain point right now, I've also got our AI virtual conference loaded in there as well. If you haven't already signed up for that event, you're going to want to be there for that. That's going to be happening in July. So just about a month away, almost to the nose. This will be recorded and available on demand as well. So if you are hearing stuff that you feel a colleague could benefit from, please share the link that you used to watch today, and let's get them armed with this same knowledge. So that being said, who are we talking to today? I mean, you can kind of see them on the camera, but these are the two folks that I've got on for us today. Jared Lobato, he is a network intrusion forensic analyst over at the United States Secret Service. I've known this guy for, gosh, 2-3 years now, I think.
Something like that.
Wonderful guy. About 2-3 years, I think. Wonderful guy. I met him at a Denver event, and much to his chagrin, he probably hasn't been able to ditch me since because I just keep having him back because he's got such a great brain for all of these threats that are happening right now. So we're going to pick his brain, get a level from him. We're also going to hear from Alex Orleans. He's the head of threat intelligence over at Sublime Security. This guy knows a ton of stuff too. He's got a wonderful background in those different letter acronyms as well, I believe. And Alex, please correct me if I'm making this stuff up here.
So I started out as a contractor back in the day. Nothing too fun in the secret squirrel world. I was at the NSC way back when, and then I bounced around the threat intelligence community for a decade.
Okay, so I didn't completely make it up, but
No.
Good.
There's an element of truth.
Right. There you go. I like that. Okay, so welcome, guys. Let's get into stuff out there in the audience. Again, what do you guys want to hear from today? We're talking. This is for you. So if there's certain email threats you want us to get into, throw something in there. But otherwise, I'm going to start with my laundry list of questions, and then we'll tackle yours as they fit in or at the end. So that being said, let's set the stage. Jared, as I mentioned at the beginning, email attacks aren't fundamentally a technology problem, right? They're a language and persuasion problem. Can you set the scene for us? What does a modern AI augmented attack campaign actually look like from a law enforcement?
So it's an interesting thing because we oftentimes really spend a lot of time in cybersecurity kind of focusing on the technicals. better firewalls, better, everything on the technical side. But when you take a look at crime overall, the difference in how crime was committed with fraud back in the 1800s is very much still the same thing we're seeing now. Now we're just doing it faster, at scale, more personalized, and then we throw AI into it. And now we're able just to go ahead and even further move faster and faster and faster into that. So, but we're still relying on the social engineering because fundamentally people are the same as they've been for thousands of years. They're motivated kind of by the same things, whether you look at, the Roman times and you see Caligula, or you look at the Epstein files now, it's very much a parallel, Socrates versus David Goggins, I guess.
Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan's probably better than David Goggins in that aspect.
There you go. No, it's true. It's true. I mean, it's like the tactic itself was well done from the beginning, really. I mean, just the whole social engineering aspect of everything has been well done and tailored with what these folks find throughout the ages, right? So let's switch to Alex. Jared just kind of described the threat from Sublime's threat intel vantage point. What does that actually look like hitting real organizations? And what's the gap between what legacy tools were built to catch and what's landing in the inbox today? So let's get that level set.
The dynamics that we see variations of usually boil down, and I think you and I talked about this the last time you had me on, which was a blast, boil down to urgency and trust. Attackers are looking at different organizations. They're looking at the social dynamics within those organizations, the professional dynamics within those organizations, thinking, all right, what are the users going to respond to in that social context? It's not click a link. It's just override the security training with some sort of basic functional emotional circuit. And it's usually urgency and trust. And you try to map across different verticals and sectors where those relationships lie. In finance, in critical infrastructure, it's often going to be, senior level to practitioner level. Big decisions need to get made and someone needs to operationalize them quickly. Activate that urgency, activate that idea of I got to respond to my boss. I got to respond to my boss's boss. Or it could be, you're in a consulting shop and somebody on your team, or it looks like there is on your team, says, I need this slide deck in the next 5 minutes. I got to present to so-and-so. And you're just going, you're not thinking it through. And adversaries can iterate things like this much, much faster than they used to be able to, not just with AI. AI is a big part of it. AI accelerates that trend, but it's over time, it's become more and more celeritis just in general. And so now from a detection standpoint, it's all right, well, you used to have detection that would take days to cover new gaps. With the differences that what we're doing now is with transparent AI tooling and detections, it's create coverage from new attacks in hours rather than days, weeks. And that's the defensive side of using agentic defenses, of using agentic software. But I think even in those situations, actors also have their own advantages too. I mean, before the stream, we were talking a little bit about how, the adversary can go through AI tooling and put up with janky code. They only need a few minutes, a few hours, while defenders often need days or weeks in order to trust the output from an agent. And what Sublime attempts to do is, what I think we do pretty successfully, is we take that agentic defense, we iterate it for customers, put it in there in the inbox to increase detection faster.
Appreciate that. Thank you. I'm curious, as you were describing this, it made the wheels started turning. And I know that attackers will sit and the dwell time, right? They like to hang out on your networks. A lot of times it could be weeks or months that they've been there, right? So are they that in tune with what's happening that they wait for these scenarios where they can tell somehow, maybe it's AI and the behavior? Are they noticing when somebody is super slammed and maybe more apt to click on these things? They know that this person is totally stressed out and they're like, okay, I'm going to launch that attack now. Are they that sophisticated, or am I giving them bad ideas?
I'm afraid you just gave them some ideas. I think that what you're talking about there is a very complex situation where the actor, normally these things are designed to facilitate initial access to a network. They're designed to be at the beginning of an intrusion, and it facilitates that dwell time. If you already have somebody in and dwelling, the tactic that you described is something that I would expect from very skilled, probably state nexus actors who are looking to target one particular individual or one particular set of data in order to achieve their objectives. Typically with e-crime actors, you see, all right, let's just get to, the part of the network that we've decided we like to hang out in. I mean, some e-crime groups really love sitting on hypervisors. They'll just rush there and then sit there, and they're not really worried about anything else. And then they'll try to do exfil relatively quickly. The longer dwell times is something that I typically associate with intelligence services. And those actors may sit on a network, sit in inboxes, and wait for the right moment to say, all right, now we're going to send Dave this email because we really want to get this presentation from him, or we really want to get these credentials from him. That's where I would associate that type.
Okay. Now I apologize. I'm actually skipping. But go ahead, Jared. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. So Tom, we'll actually see some of that on a business email compromise where somebody will go ahead and have forwarding rules set up and watch all these emails go back, and they kind of get a sense of the hierarchy of the company, a better feel of those. There's so many different attacks that have an origination in email. Sometimes it's just downloading that PDF, but a lot of times it's seeing who's actually in charge, seeing who has access to different things. And so oftentimes people have forwarding rules messed up for months and months before they ever actually get compromised. So, I mean, we're kind of dealing with two different things. Alex is talking about APTs, but even some of these, scammers on a business email compromise will sit there and watch and see what comes across and who actually has, the checkbook, so they can start capitalizing on that.
Right. Thank you, guys. That was my question, my little tangent. So I know that's not really necessarily the BEC angle. Is definitely email, but yeah. We actually got a couple of great audience questions in here. Let me see here. Armando wants to know, so would the strategy be leaning towards enhancing behavioral detection, or is still reliant on employee continuous education? Good question.
I'm happy to take that. I think we're reaching a point where we're reaching the ceiling for employee continuous education. A good example that I deal with a lot, people often ask us in webinars and sales discussions, in head-to-heads, how do you deal with deepfakes? My response is, you're not seeing, for example, typically deepfakes attached to emails. It's an AI problem, but it's not necessarily an inbox problem. And if you're having employees who are responding, to successfully deepfaked voices or videos that are coming in a certain way, you can only train so much for that. So continuous education has a ceiling. It also has a floor, and you need to be off that floor. You can't neglect it. But at the same time, and I want to make sure I'm seeing the question correctly, because I see the chat is scrolling.
Yeah, people are throwing stuff in there. They want to know stuff.
So I think so the behavioral detection aspect, which is layered, it's the way we do it is very layered. It begins with detections, and then we move into multiple agents that iterate in different manners on the same set of data to dig deeper and to look across different data sets within the email itself. Behavioral detection, and I'm glad Armando said behavioral detection, because we have seen more and more in the CTI world that static detection of IOCs is going out the window unless you can get really far left of intrusion, unless you're fingerprinting adversary infrastructure, for example. And so being able to develop agents that can identify the behavioral patterns in malicious emails, even if they're just plain text, but being able to see where it's coming from, what's in the header footer, what's in the text, what kind of language, what kind of communication is being attempted, that's something that really is necessary now in a way that it wasn't even 3 years ago.
Right. Anything you would add, Jared?
It's interesting because you take a look at the, continuous education. And the problem is that, we've had people falling for scams. We did a presentation on kind of the yellow kid wheel. He was a guy that was a con artist back in the 1800s. And they do some of the same things that you see now, where you get the victim to kind of agree to something that's a little dubious, maybe a little ethically gray. And, we still see those type of things where, now we're roping people into these old style scams, especially when we start talking about pig butchering. And, we see a lot more deep fakes in that world where people are actually pretending to be somebody else and doing it. So we've got so many different vectors of attacks regarding email, but the continuous education, if we could fix the layer 8 problem, I would be out of a job. I would do something else for a living. But the problem is everyone keeps clicking on things, everybody. And then if you make security so good, then eventually you want to use something else because it's so inconvenient to use. I've read some really interesting things, and Alex, maybe you can verify this or not, but it looks like we're going beyond just like certain words in the key, but like we can actually get a baseline for how an employee talks on their email and then cross-check it, is what I've seen some of the AI tools doing.
Yeah, that is something that we're moving in the direction of. I mean, like a lot of people, I use Claude at work. Sometimes if I'm trying to noodle a sentence that I'm not liking my own word choice on, I can say, look at my conversations, depending on what plugins you have, you might have an AI agent that's reading your emails already. And that becomes an AI agentic thing. Where there was a question in the chat about, security for using agents inside your own organization. It becomes another potential target, not just via email, but through a bunch of different vectors, where if an actor can access an instance during an MCP server or something like that and say, write me an email that sounds like Steve from accounting. Suddenly you're getting something that's more high fidelity, and you want an agentic detection layer that's going to be looking for the same thing, that's going to be looking for how does this cadence fit against what normal baseline communications you have, and so on. And it can get kind of scary. I have not, in my own work, seen an AI be able to keep up with particularly sophisticated human voices and tone in terms of how they communicate on the written page. But for shorter, simpler things, you can definitely model that out pretty quickly, especially if you already have visibility into a network.
We teach a judges and prosecutors class, and one of my friends is a judge. And so all of his verdicts and rulings are public data. And we took all his rulings, built basically an AI mimic, and we kind of compared it on like, how would you rule in this case? And with enough data, we were able to really predict kind of what the AI, judge would do pretty accurately. And so it kind of gets the idea that if attackers are creative and they have enough, like if you go into LinkedIn, although LinkedIn's kind of sad in general, because I feel like it's people using AI to argue with other people using AI. And it's just like this back and forth and no one really talks.
Yeah.
But if you can get enough data from there, just publicly available, and everyone loves to post on LinkedIn, and it's available to pretty much everybody. It's kind of a scary thing.
LinkedIn, X, even Blue Sky, people will, and they'll have different voices in different places. You'll often see, okay, what does marketing really want me to say? That'll show up on X. What do I want for my career? That's what'll show up in LinkedIn, even if it's AI based. And then Blue Sky might be, the unfiltered version or the more irreverent version. And if an actor is able to tag, your identity to different accounts and is able to start hoovering that stuff up, they can, with the right prompts, you can really craft something that sounds like a human being. For sure. And that's kind of I liked that you mentioned the AI, people are using AI to argue with someone else's use of AI, because there's nothing sadder than a LinkedIn post that's like, I shattered my femur on my recent weekend hike, and here's what it taught me about B2B sales. But still, it's that.
Sorry, I've seen that stuff. I've seen that stuff.
Oh yeah. But even that is grist for the mill. So if you're trying to chase clout on LinkedIn, what you're actually doing probably more is creating jokes for other people. But at the same time, you're giving attackers a visibility into how you at least want to sound or appear to sound. And if you're trying to sound smart on LinkedIn, you want to sound smart to your bosses too, and suddenly the voices start to blend a little bit, and then the utility for the attacker goes up.
Yeah.
I want to go to another audience question here. Lori was asking, this kind of follows up with what we were talking about earlier. How about a poisoned email that compromises other accounts? So you've got one, somebody's been compromised, and then they blast it out to the rest of the group, right? So how are we seeing that? Is that still a thing? And how can we thwart that with AI behavioral technology?
Well, I think I see less. More it's you're trying to get an initial set of credentials, and then you're trying to get into the network and embed, and usually you'll do more tailored stuff to follow on emails. If someone forwards it, that's great. If someone forwards an email and they click as well, which is, we've definitely seen that. Somebody forwards an email, suddenly, rather than one person clicking, 12 people have clicked. And that's something that then, feeds through our detection and analysis layer to create new coverage rules to interdict that before it can spread it even further if it's gotten through the perimeter. But in my experience, and I imagine Jared's had a different one, because most of my background is nation state. Most of my background is APT. Yeah. Jared knows crime much better than I do. Often it's really targeted at specific individuals, and it's, anything else is gravy. It's not like the strategic web compromises of back in the day when it was everybody to go to this one website so that they all end up, with the one cookie that gets downloaded kind of a thing. God, I miss it. Those were so easy to interdict by comparison. Once you found one, you just blocked it.
I think it really kind of depends on the type of crime. Like for some of the ransomware things, we'll see, it really kind of goes back to the basics. We focus. So for perspective, the 2025 Internet Crime Complaint stats came out for this year. And for the first time, they took a look at AI augmented crimes, and they make up about 5% of total crimes. So we focus a lot on, these very specific things, but it's kind of like the question of what's the most dangerous creature in Africa. And a lot of people say hippos, what's the mosquitoes? Mosquitoes kill everybody. And you see just so much basic stuff where it's like, hey, this is a Windows 97 computer that's somehow on the system that we keep because it runs this one piece of software. I still see ransomware based on that, and what Alex is talking about with the nation state actors and APTs, obviously that's a very different kind of attack, but you kind of see everything in the middle. You'll still see people, again, macros creating a living on the land attack, and then it lives there just because somebody clicked on enable all, macros. So we still see it. You're right.
Thank you for that. I have to go to Brian's question just because he's got some song lyrics in there. If you practice Santeria or had a crystal ball, would you predict that AI will help defend against threats as effectively as it enhances threats? Or will there be an imbalance while the defense catches up to the advancements in the appearance of legitimacy of what is coming?
So we were talking about this earlier. We were talking about this before the stream. I think and Jared and I each were coming at it from different resources. I was coming at it from a time perspective. I think that right now we're in a position where LLMs can enable threat actors closer to something that's more sophisticated, but it's not turning it into it's not automatically turning someone into, a super hacker or whatever term we're going to see in dark reading next week. But at the same time, malicious actors can iterate faster and work sloppier. They don't need everything to use QA. They don't have to follow policies and playbooks. They go find me an exploit, build me an exploit, and let's spam it and see until it works. While on the contrast, defenders have to go, all right, we have to vet this model, we have to develop trust in it, we have to get it tuned properly, then we have to go through, and every time it gives us a vuln assessment or a patch development or things like that, all of that has to go through QA and QC and managerial review. So, finding and validating an exploit is easier with lower risk, but fixing it is harder. So it's a time difference between hours and weeks. So, and I think that imbalance is going to favor the attacker for a while. Around the time of RSA, there's a big panel discussion. The next 18 months are going to be kind of where the asymmetry is most apparent. And I think that's probably correct. But I think eventually it's going to come back around to, once defenders are kind of forced to make cogent decisions about where AI sits in their remediation and defensive strategies, that the defender knowledge of, well, we have immediate access to everything we need as long as we actually go looking for it, you'll see AI start to catch up as a defensive tool in that sort of development pipeline. But in terms of email interdiction, you're able to leverage the agentic stuff earlier because it's about detection and it's about feeding the cycles really quickly from a large scale of data. And it's not okay, now we have to patch the code. It's all right, we're observing behaviors in the wild and synthesizing them rapidly.
Appreciate that. I was getting some noise feedback from somewhere. I'm not sure where that was coming from. Just be cognizant of that. One of you, I muted my line, so I know it's not mine, but just a heads up. Jared, would you agree or disagree with the prediction?
No, I think that's a pretty accurate. It's kind of the Wild West with AI right now. Even on the attacker side, you see attackers a little hesitant to really go all in on agentic AI, especially when you start taking a look at Lazarus Group and some of the crypto scammers that are really revolving heavy around money. That's a big challenge. You're right. Alex and I kind of came at it from two different aspects. He was going from a time aspect. From a dollar amount standpoint right now, it's pennies on the dollar for an attack versus literal pennies to probably about $10 to try and use AI to try and remediate a lot of it. And the people we end up seeing victims the most are the companies that can't afford a really good, robust cybersecurity system. A lot of smaller, middle ground companies that struggle as these new technologies come out. So I think Alex is right. I think it's going to go ahead and plateau in a little bit, but right now everything's new, everything's exciting. Since November of 2022 and OpenAI was released, every presentation I've given has been completely different on the subject.
I know, because I've done some of these with you. They're evolving. I mean, it really is. And I like that about the presentations that you do, because it is kind of the bleeding edge of how can we, in the case of the deep fake one that we did, you pointed out that, this is how you can spot them now, but that was 4 months ago. So I'll bet there's a different way now, right? So no, I appreciate that. Good stuff. Let me see here. I liked actually when Alex was talking, you were almost clicking off little things on our little castle map as you were kind of describing your answer. Anyway, I was like, hey, he's actually ticking off why old defenses fail. Before we put a pin in old defenses, I want to kind of go into, I saw a question here from Monique. She was like, how important is DMARC and knowledge of it in phishing protection using AI or not? Because DMARC goes way back. That's not new. So what do you guys think about that?
I think it's huge. Specifically, when we take a look at an email and when we're taking a look at a business email compromise or just where an email came from, when we're looking at email on your phone or on your computer, most people are not going into actually digging into the header and the DMARC. Most people just take a look. Is this actually, is it visibly looking like it's the person it is? I think if you're taking a look at automated phishing protection, and Alex would speak to this better than I would, it's absolutely, necessary to have, just because no one checks the headers. And if you do, you're a psychopath, on every email you get.
No, and I mean, that's something that we do.
Yeah. And that's why you would need something like this specifically. And this is not an endorsement, I want to be clear, but having some sort of email protection is, it's very necessary.
Alex, what do you think? Give us some more on DMARC.
Well, I will admit, I come from an endpoint background. My career up until now has been endpoint, but I do know that we take DMARC into account when we're looking at EML files, when we're pulling apart, how we're building our detections, how we're instructing and educating our agents. DMARC is not left by the wayside. It's something that, sometimes the old stuff is still relevant, and I don't see DMARC going away anytime soon.
My understanding is rough to set up, but once it's set up, it works fairly well. So, and there's ways to set that up for free actually out there. I've done a few sessions with folks that do them. So anyway, if you want to know more about that stuff or figure out how to make that work for you, shoot me an email. I can forward you some of those sessions that we did a couple years back. Let's get into some more questions. I'm going to put a pin on the audience ones for the moment, but I want to get into the agent layer, right? So, all right. So, Jared, I've heard you cover something called agentic AI Trillium. I can't even pronounce words today. My God. High volume, low latency, high efficacy can't all be solved by throwing more agents at a problem. Does that constraint show up on the attack side? And what shortcuts are you seeing adversaries take?
I think that word is dilemma. I think it's a typo for dilemma, maybe.
Thank God, because I'm like, what is that?
Trilemma. It's trilemma. It's the three-part. It's the high volume, low latency, high efficiency. So it's all
gotcha.
Thank you for that.
Yep.
So talking about that trifecta right there, it's interesting because I used to say we would treat AI like a child, and with the kind of advent of agentic AI, I think now we kind of treat it more like an intern. I'm willing to supervise it and do that. But the problem is you just can't stick a human in the loop on everything, or all you would do is just sit and approve. There comes a point when you have to trust the agent and make sure the agent's able to follow through with it. But on the attacker side, we are seeing more agentic AI. We're still seeing a ton of it just augmented, meaning that people are the leap between using AI and moving into agentic AI. There's still another step there for a lot of attackers going straight into it. I mean, you're seeing it more and more and more, but I'd say it's on the adoption side. People are a little bit hesitant. And even if you take a look at Anthropic's, they did a study on one of their first cyber espionage campaigns. There were still 5 segments within that where they still needed human verification, like to confirm, hey, this is what we're doing, And what I would say, it's kind of the same thing. If you have a boss, your boss doesn't just let you go completely wild. They check in from time to time to make sure that you're, moving and attacking the way that you're supposed to be attacking.
Alex, I think it might be helpful if you wouldn't mind. You guys, or your approach is specifically designed around this concept, right? So can you walk us through how your platform actually is structured, why the agent layer only works if there's something precise under it filtering? I think that might help the audience a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So the trilemma that Jared lays out here is very much tied to our architecture story. And it's, so you have high volume, you have low latency, and you have high efficiency. And those 3 things together are why just throwing agents at problems doesn't work, because the agents have to have time to learn. What we do is we structure it so we have our detections, which are written by our detection engineers based on, mass observation of our data. Then we have our attack score, which is the output of, okay, it's gone through all of these detections. What does just that alone say about the email? And then if so you have the high volume, you have low latency taken care of right there. The detections are dealing with the volume. The low latency is, bam, here's an assessment very quickly based on detections observed with low latency. But then you need high efficacy too. So when you have a more complicated or more novel problem, that's where things jump into our AI agents, ASA and ADE. And so most of what we deal with, even from the TI side, from the threat intel team, things aren't necessarily even reaching the agentic layer for us because we're interdicting them through the detections and through the attack score, all of which is then built on the insights that generated from whatever does reach the agent layer, and it comes back through. So it's precision and intentionality on top of detection logic, not as a substitute, not as agents as a substitute for detection logic.
Thank you for that. Out in the audience, if you want more on that, throw something in the chat or the Q&A. I'm going to pop over to Josh's question. If you guys are, Jared and Alex are looking. AI has given way to a rise in zero-day exploits. Do you see any particular email-related exploits on the rise, or areas you wouldn't be surprised to see something pop up? I think we're going back to that crystal ball in some cases, but what are you guys seeing out there with this for 0 day?
So from what I'm seeing so far has not been new ODAs in the inbox. I haven't been seeing those, but I worry about them every day. The stories that you hear coming out in major news articles about things like Mythos and other things are, okay, now they can find vulnerabilities in ubiquitous software very, very quickly, including software that was relatively thought to be vuln-free. For the time being, actors are going to prioritize using that the way that they've been using vulnerabilities for the last 7 years since Exchange Apocalypse happened in 2019, where they're spamming exploits at externally facing systems. They're trying to get in through network devices, things like that, seeing what they can easily pop and then move through. And that's where the biggest fears come from when you hear people talking about oh, this next 18 months is going to be awful. It's going to be the rush to patch things. There's going to be vulnerabilities that exist in mail server software, in attachments like PDFs and Office documents, things like that. There are going to be vulns that can be found in the way that those are written and maintained. And that's when they'll show up in the inbox. That's the part that scares me the most. That's not something that's going to iterate as easily, and it pulls email into that same space that so many other AI threats have to deal with right now. I mean, so many AI conscious organizations have to deal with now, which is the patching timeline and the detection pipeline. I haven't seen it yet. It's any day now. Any day now. Everything happens once for the first time, and you usually don't see it when it happens for the first time. You usually find out later.
Okay, another question that earlier I want to pop back to. Lori had asked, are current email security measures catching the AI agents sending emails? That's curious. Like, I'm assuming autonomously. Have either of you seen that?
We still see, again, it goes back to the whole blocks and tackles thing. Just because someone's using agentic AI doesn't mean they're using a magic wand. What they're doing is they're using conventional techniques, just automated, so I still think we're still catching a lot of those, that you're seeing from a bad domain, et cetera. Again, the AI aspect of it just speeds it up at scale and lowers barrier to entry is, I think, the big thing we're seeing. And you're also seeing a lot more phishing as a service. People are actually going out there and paying for a subscription on the dark web to go ahead and phish targets for them. And they're just going ahead and paying for the service.
So Jared, you made a really, really good point that I want to dig into a little bit more, which is, it's the AI stuff. It's not a transformative thing. It's automating things. And because we're saying AI instead of automation, and because the industry is saying that as well, it can sound scarier. To me, there's still this gap that exists between, a script kiddie and an APT or a very sophisticated e-crime group that exists even in the age of democratized capabilities via different LLM models. You're moving things closer, but you're not jumping to one end of the spectrum automatically. Because what we're seeing, and even in Anthropic's report, which you mentioned earlier, what Anthropic described that Chinese espionage campaign as essentially doing was doing a lot of automation of what is otherwise kind of the scut work of a campaign.
The boring stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The stuff that takes time, the stuff that operators often get lazy with, things like that. And you could even see in some cases, if the operators are teaching the AI lazy habits, the AI is not going to improve on them. The AI is just going to go with what it's taught. And so it's, there's a meme gone around the internet of from The Dark Knight Rises, where it's Bane talking to that business guy, and he goes, "Do you feel in control?" And the business guy thinks that he's in control, and the other guy's Bane. And it's the difference between, a guy saying, I feel in control because I once, discovered a vulnerability and I have my OSCP, and the other guy saying, I'm the Chinese Ministry of State Security. Like there's still a fundamental gap that exists, even if one guy thinks he's on the same playing field as the other. And one of the things I think that industry and media and the government all have a responsibility to do is to not play into that fear, which is really hard because explaining the operational realities of what dealing with AI threats is like is not easy for anybody.
Yeah. I think a lot of people miss this with AI use in general, is that you have to have a level of domain mastery in whatever you're using it for. It's not going to take me and turn me into a mathematician. I will tell you that WebMD was the worst thing ever to happen to me in my 20s, because I can think of 2 specific times I had gone to the doctor thinking it was cancer. And it's because you don't have an expertise in that. Well, now we've gone ahead and created, I don't want to say a magic 8-ball, but we've created this device that if you're asking the wrong questions, it'll give you answers that look almost right. And you're seeing it in legal, you're seeing it in cybersecurity. We've had cases that just keep getting put up with a completely made up case law because nobody's verifying it. And that's still happening today. And you have to have a level of domain mastery in whatever you're using AI for. So if you're a doctor and you're using AI, obviously that might actually be beneficial to you. But if you're me, and I'm trying to diagnose why my knee hurts, it may not work out so well for me. And it's the same thing with kind of what you're talking about on these threat actors,
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, often from a cybersecurity perspective, as somebody who's been in the space for a long time, when I'm still tackling specific issues, if I need to educate myself about something fundamental, something basic that I can then cross-check, often I'll use an agent as a substitute for a Google search, because now Google search results are all over the place. But if I ask Claude a very specific question, it can give me a very specific answer, and I can say, give me citations for this, and then I can go double check it rather than having to bounce around through, an hour and a half on Google. But at the same time, when
it actually verify the citation.
Exactly, because you can't take what it's saying as something that's self-verified. How many times have any one of us used an AI agent and asked it a question, and then we see something that's demonstrably wrong with the answer, and we ask, why did you do that? And it says, oh, I over-indexed on one source because I thought it sounded cool. Like these things aren't reliable in a sense that they can operate without being second guessed. They're reliable in the sense that you can have them produce something, but you still have to verify it. Folks on my team are, they vibe code tools for us to use on our back end sometimes while we're conducting investigations. But it's, what might take weeks of development now takes days, but the days part is still QA, QC by a human being. It might only take hours for something to get iterated, but you're still going to need that time to make sure that it actually works.
Yeah, and sign your name to it, etc.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch gears. Let's go to the human element. We've talked about it a little bit toward the beginning, but I want to get into this again. Let's talk about social engineering attacks on humans and in prompt injection attacks on AI systems, right? So what's the one principle you see most consistently exploited in the cases that land on your desk? I'm talking to Jared here. And what does recognition actually look like in practice?
So it's interesting. This came from a presentation I think I had sent you, Tom, regarding a research paper that was done showing that people respond to a certain way. The book is called Influence by Cialdini, excuse me. And he iterates 6 different principles of influence in human behavior, and they evolve around, scarcity, how available is something is, reciprocity, do I feel like somebody owes me something, likability, etc. The biggest one, and Alex mentioned it, for phishing, it ends up being urgency. But I'll tell you, if you take a look at persuasion in general, all 6 have really impactful things. This used to be kind of a required reading in a marketing class that I took. And it was interesting to see it show back up on the research paper side. But the most consistently exploited is urgency, especially when it comes to IT help desk. We just want to get something off our table. Somebody needs this, and it's when we start basically bypassing verification and that ends up hitting the most.
Based off of that, I want to spin something over to Alex, if I can get the words out of my head and out of my mouth properly today. So basically what I'm hearing you say is if you can't see what's happening, you can't interrupt it. So Alex, talk to me about transparency. This isn't just a feature. This is like a philosophy that people need to actually have. What does it mean for verdicts that trace back to specific signals and specific content, and what matters when something gets through?
So
I made that make
this is a big part about both Sublime's like product and corporate philosophy, is this emphasis on transparency, where rather than having a black box AI that generates a plausible narrative as to why something got stopped, we have this transparent detection logic that is direct with the person it's defending about what pattern it's recognizing. So these 6 methods of kind of influence that Jared is talking about, these can be, you can write detections for these things to a certain extent before they have to reach to an agentic layer. And so it's the idea that you have a practical payoff where if you're seeing an attacker come at you with a specific narrative and it's detecting on something, you can go and see, oh, this rule said this and it means that. So now we have to be on the lookout for XYZ type of narrative, rather than just saying, hey, this is bad. Because then you're not informing either your network defenders, and you're not giving them a chance to give feedback to what we talked about way at the beginning, which is the continuous education. Because it becomes a feedback loop, and you want that feedback loop.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Let me see here, looking in the audience questions, looking for AI email security type stuff is what we're looking for here. There's a lot of other AI questions in there, but it's kind of off topic a little bit. In that case, I'm going to move on to more of mine. Let's see here. So Alex, I'm going to give you a scenario. Let's say we're talking skip level phishing scenario. Attack hits an organization that's running Sublime. Congrats, right? Never seen before. No existing direction for this attack. Walk us through what happens from the moment it arrives to new coverage being deployed. No tickets filled and no vendor queue, right? So give us kind of a walkthrough.
Yeah, so first you're going to have the detections firing. That's the initial triage. Then you're going to have the attack score running based on what it's identified. So it's going to be looking not just for what static detections it has written for. There's going to be dynamic detections that do linguistic analysis, that are looking for technical indicators, looking for the way the email is structured. And as those add up, you're going to get an attack score. That's the traffic cop. That's saying, thumbs up, thumbs down. Let's keep looking at it. And if it needs to get really deep into that, that's going to go to our agentic layer, which is our first agentic layer is called ASA, our automated security agent. And that'll decide, okay, do we, if we are at something that's new or novel, do we need to start writing a new detection or adjust a new detection? Or is this something where, is it a false negative or a false positive? We're looking into different things to sort that out. That happens at the ASA layer. And then if we're able to identify, okay, this is malicious, this is new, then it goes to ADE, our specialist, which is our automated detection engineer. And it's going to write a new detection right away. and pushes that out and notifies us so that we're working on it at the same time. So you don't have, even if it's a novel attack, you're going to have a novel attack that manages to escape a lot of behavioral iterations, a lot of dynamic structures that we're already looking for, that we can't, precisely enunciate, but that we can say from a detection logic standpoint and in a transparent way as well, like look for this pattern, look for this. I don't like saying vibe because now vibe coded has taken it all away from us, but something in that direction. And then you're going quickly from that to, if it's new, we're having an agent is writing a detection based on it right away. So you're not getting it something that's days later. You're getting something that is org specific, that is back tested and deployed relatively rapidly.
Thank you for that. Jared, anything you would add or any questions about what he just said?
No, I thought that looked good. I was looking at the optional thing. I wasn't sure if you were going to go that route on the optional question, but
no, I'm going to give you. I'm giving you that optional one. First, the bottom one though. So I've got a scenario for you too, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so pretend we've got a security team at a mid-sized company that wants to meaningfully improve their email security posture without it becoming a 6-month project. Now, I know you're not in the vendor community, you're on the other side of it all, but what's the most important thing that they should change as they start this endeavor?
So for me, the big thing is when we do remediation, we contact CISA. We want to make sure we're not giving, endorsements and advice, et cetera. But it would go through kind of basically what I've been talking about this entire time, which is blocks and tackles, like really stick to the basics, have a firewall of some kind, make sure you have MFA. There's plenty of stuff that can beat MFA, but the goal is to go ahead and design a defense in depth that, everyone's been talking about ad nauseum. The big thing I would stay away from is bring your own devices. There's so much of that causes breaches that we end up seeing on that. So MFA, have a firewall, have some sort of antivirus enabled and focus, no bring your own devices. And again, having an awareness of scams and trainings and the capabilities, I would start right there with just stuff that you could basically fix and cover very, very cheaply before we start. Because ultimately this entire game is a resource scarcity game. And it's how much money and time do you want to spend? Are we going to spend all this time focusing on trying to protect one specific thing that may or may not be, something we have to worry about for this company? But all those things I mentioned, those are all just easy blocks and tackles. And it's especially important for the small to mid-range companies that don't have, an entire SOC and SIEM working for them.
Right.
And I want to piggyback right off what you just said, Jared, is that, often for those smaller companies, it can look really scary out there.
Yeah.
The tone of both industry and media coverage of cyber threats is not, for the most part, is not calm. It can be alarmist. We all have talked about FUD for years, and it's not going to go anywhere. So the first thing that I say isn't, buy Sublime. I'll say that later. But the first thing that I always tell any company is understand the operational reality of what your threats actually are. Take the time to look at yourself from a sober perspective and go, all right, how am I valuable to what threat actor? And in some cases, you might find that you're of interest to more actors than you thought. Typically, that's the case if you're a big company, if you're holding a lot of data. Financial institutions sometimes are surprised to find out that foreign intelligence services are just as interested in them as criminals are in taking their money. But small to medium-sized businesses, if you step back from what you're kind of ingesting via the media and look at, all right, what do we have here? How could it really be used to someone's benefit? You're going to see a tighter threat profile, and that's what you operate from. You operate from the operational reality of the threats that are against you. And then the natural part that I'm experiencing now in my time at Sublime is that, the same way that AV gave way to EDR email security is growing in that same direction as well, where the basic standards and functionality need to be a level up. And it's about finding the right thing that fits for your enterprise.
Yeah. Update your software too.
Yeah.
Yes, please patch your stuff.
Please patch. Please
update.
Patch your stuff. It is Tuesday today. Patch your stuff, please. You know.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move to our final stuff. We're almost out of time, so I'm gonna ask the guys to look forward. Going back to Brian's situation, where if we practice Santeria or if we had a crystal ball, right? So, Jared, what's the attack you're most worried about that organizations aren't prepared for today?
Which organization, I guess, is the first thing I would ask.
And let's say it's a FinServ or healthcare. You can pick.
Okay, so we've got HIPAA and we've got again, I think it's the same ones that we've been looking at. You know, ransomware got huge and then it kind of got smaller over time, and it's not quite as prevalent as it used to be. Unsecure APIs, those are a lot of them. There's so much good code out there right now, but the problem is there's so many bad repositories that are fueling some of this good code. So we see a lot of, node packet managers that are creating really creative ways to deliver malicious payloads. So as software improves, I really hope, again, we're kind of taking a step back and actually verifying all the independent, smaller pieces of software we're putting into it. And again, it just goes back to the blocks and tackles for everything else, I would say. But those two things are kind of the ones that I'm probably most concerned about, because Mia Jovovich has a GitHub repository now, which has a tremendous amount of stars, which Mia Jovovich was in The Fifth Element. I don't know if you remember her, Tom.
And Resident Evil.
Yeah.
And Resident Evil.
Oh.
She has a very popular one on agentic AI memory. And it's crazy to think that, moving forward, I think Jensen Huang said that intelligence is becoming a commodity. So you've got a lot of really creative people out there augmenting it with AI. And so it means there's a lot of bad software, good software that may or may not be production ready that people are throwing at it. So it definitely is kind of the Wild West with where everything's at.
Right.
Yeah.
Alex, I'm switching it up on you just a little bit.
Okay.
So how does email security have to evolve, and what does getting ahead of it actually look like rather than just keeping pace?
So I think it goes into the same direction as Jared was talking about. And to me, that's thinking outside the box. The sort of poisoned packets, poisoned code aspect that he was talking about, something that we've seen with Team TNT, the e-crime actor, over the recent months. I think we have to understand that each one of these traditional vectors, be it remote external service compromise, compromise via email credential collection, all of these things, people are going to try to think outside the box on how to leverage whatever data they're getting in new ways. I spent a long time in the EDR space working on supply chain compromises. And then, the idea of NPM packet poisoning came out of left field for me, because I was thinking in a whole other different galaxy of supply chain compromise about, getting inside a target company and researching their material from the back end and deploying it selectively. These are the permutations that actors are going to be going through. And really, for email security, for, AI patching pipelines, things like that, I think it just means thinking outside the box, not being afraid to speak up in a meeting and say something that might sound dumb. Because, attackers are going to go after the path of least resistance, but they're also going to throw everything at the wall. And I think we have to do the same.
Right. Appreciate that, both of you. That concludes our time with the guys. If you want to reach out to them, you can. In the that menu bar at the bottom, you can reach out. Their bios and stuff are down there, along with, I believe, with their emails too. Otherwise, we've got more stuff on the way. There is a, well, you can see it on the screen. We've got 2 more remote sessions this week, and then another one next week. We've got the Mythos stuff going on tomorrow. Why password managers fail on Thursday. And then Tuesday next week, we're going to be talking about phishing at scale. So probably a more kind of a follow-up from this one, maybe. And then also, I believe, Alex, please correct me if I'm wrong. You guys have a webcast tomorrow as well that's live. So I have that in the Resource Center. So register for that one too. Arm yourself with these knowledge, people. That's all I can say. Is my thing is arm yourself with as much knowledge. Find people like Jared and Alex that you can ask questions of that want to help you. And that's how we're going to have to proceed. We've got to work together because the bad guys do it very, very well, sadly. That being said, download your certificate of attendance today, please. And I changed the logo. I know it's not really the Sublime logo there for the company or the band. I didn't want to get sued. So yeah, we got 40 ounces of AI emails.
I'm going to need you to send me that. That might be a shirt that needs to get made. I think maybe a challenge coin or something. I'm a big fan of that.
I'll send it to you right after this.
Absolutely.
You can thank Gemini for that. So AI is my friend. Sorry, I can't mix up. But thank you guys for answering our questions. The folks in the audience for being here. All of you. We'll have these guys back hopefully again. Jared does a bunch of stuff with me anyway. Hopefully we'll see Alex on some other stuff too. But that concludes our time today. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. And Pat.
Thanks so much, Tom. Thanks, Jared. Be well, everyone.
Thank you. It was great working with you guys.